Everyone thinks avoidants fear love, but that's not true. What they fear is what love turns them into. If you think an avoidant pulls away because they don't care, you're about to learn the truth. They'll never say out loud. Love for an avoidant is not soft, sweet, or simple. It's not the romantic rush most people imagine. It's a deep internal shift that feels like losing control, losing independence, and becoming visible in a way that terrifies them. Avoidants don't step back because they don't feel love. They step back because love forces them into a level of emotional exposure they've spent their entire life avoiding. When someone gets too close, everything inside them whispers the same warning: careful, you're being seen. And for an avoidant, being seen is the most dangerous place to stand. Their fear isn't love itself, it's what love activates. Love brings up old wounds, buried memories, and the haunting belief that closeness leads to loss. As soon as they feel genuine attachment, they become hyper aware of every flaw, every insecurity, every part of themselves they believe is unlovable. While others lean into love for comfort, avoidants brace themselves for impact. In their mind, emotional closeness is a risk, not a refuge. So they retreat, not to punish you, but to protect themselves from a vulnerability they never learned how to hold. What most people don't realize is that avoidants love quietly, internally, and long before they ever show it. You'll see their behavior last, but they feel everything first. They'll watch you, study you, remember small details you didn't even notice you shared. They'll test your consistency, not because they're manipulative, but because consistency is the only language they trust. And while you're questioning if they care, they're questioning if they're capable of being loved without losing themselves. When an avoidant pulls back, it's rarely about you. It's about the fear that closeness will make them dependent, exposed, or worse, disappointing. Love makes them aware of their own emotional limits in a way nothing else does. They worry they won't show up right. They worry their walls will hurt you. They worry that once you see their emotional distance, you'll walk away first. So they take space to breathe, to think, to calm the panic that rises whenever someone gets too close. But here's the part no one talks about. Avoidants don't run because they feel nothing. They run because they feel too much. Their instinct is to retreat before they get overwhelmed, before their attachment becomes obvious, before they hand over a part of themselves. They're scared to lose. And yet, the very act of pulling back is proof that something real has started. Distance for an avoidant is not the absence of love. It's the signal that love has already begun. Because love is not easy for them. But the right connection doesn't chase that fear away. It teaches them they can stay even with it. Avoidants aren't scared of you. They're scared of the mirror that love forces them to look into, a mirror that reflects all the unhealed parts they've spent years avoiding. When someone gets too close, it doesn't feel warm or comforting. It feels like suddenly being under a spotlight with nowhere to hide every flaw, every insecurity, every emotional bruise they've learned to keep buried rises to the surface. And for someone who survived by staying in control of their inner world, that exposure feels like stepping into danger without armor. When an avoidant begins to feel attached, their instinct isn't excitement, it's alarm. It's a quiet internal panic that whispers, careful, they can see you now. This is why their deepest reflex becomes hide before you're seen. Not because they don't want love, but because being truly known feels like the most vulnerable and therefore risky thing they could ever allow. Love is not a soft landing for an avoidant. It's a situation where their emotions start pushing up from beneath the surface, demanding to be felt, understood, or shared, and that level of emotional exposure terrifies them. To an avoidant, love equals vulnerability, and vulnerability equals danger. Not theoretical danger, emotional danger, the kind that comes from relying on someone else, from revealing parts of themselves they don't even fully accept, from letting someone into the inner room they've kept locked for years. If they let you in, you now have the power to see their fears, their imperfections, their emotional limits. And worse, you have the power to leave. That possibility alone can make even a healthy relationship feel threatening. It's not that avoidants can't love deeply. They often feel more than they show, but love demands openness. Openness demands trust, and trust demands surrender. That chain of emotional vulnerability is exactly what their nervous system is wired to resist. So when they start caring, instead of leaning closer, they step back to regain their emotional balance. Creating distance helps them control the intensity of what they're feeling. It gives them time to think instead of react, to breathe instead of panic, to manage their emotions in private before they risk sharing them. And here's the part that's hard for partners to understand. The avoidance distance is not a rejection, it's a shield, a survival habit, a conditioned reflex built from years of learning that closeness can hurt, overwhelm, or lead to abandonment. Their withdrawal is them trying to protect themselves from losing control or becoming dependent in ways that once felt unsafe. Love shakes the walls they've relied on. It asks them to show up authentically without hiding behind independence or emotional minimalism. That level of realness is terrifying. So when love arrives, it doesn't feel safe. It feels exposing. And exposure to an avoidant is the bravest and scariest territory they can enter. Avoidants feel deeply, privately. Their emotions don't disappear. They just stay locked behind doors you don't know how to open. Long before an avoidant ever gives you a sign, long before they take a step closer, long before they say anything that sounds like affection, they've already felt something. They'll fall for you in their mind weeks, sometimes months before you ever see the slightest shift in their behavior. Their love starts internally, quietly, safely, in a place where no one can judge them, expect anything from them, or take anything away. For an avoidant, the beginning of love is not expressed through big gestures. It begins with silent observing. They watch how you move through the world, how you react to things, how you treat others. They listen to the tone of your voice, the timing of your responses, the softness or sharpness of your energy. This is how they learn you, not through questions, but through presence. They're paying attention long before you realize they're even interested. Then comes the remembering. Tiny details you assumed passed unnoticed, they store them. The way you like your coffee, the song you said reminds you of childhood, the story you told once in passing about something you wish you could heal in yourself. They notice what matters to you because observing from a safe emotional distance allows them to appreciate you without being overwhelmed by feelings they don't yet know how to manage. But the real sign, the deeper, truer sign, is when they silently begin testing your emotional consistency. Not intentionally, not manipulatively, but instinctively. They might take a little space, not to push you away, but to see if you remain steady. They might open up a small amount, sharing something vulnerable, then close up again, just to see how you respond. They're not playing games, they're checking for safety. They're trying to understand if you're someone who destabilizes them or grounds them. The irony is this: you notice their love last, they notice it first. By the time you start picking up on subtle changes, the slightly softer tone, the longer eye contact, the small acts of thoughtfulness, they've already felt everything. They've already debated it internally, battled it, resisted it, surrendered to it, then resisted it again. They've already gone through the emotional storm alone because that's where they feel safest processing anything intense. Avoidants don't reveal love as it grows. They reveal it only after they've convinced themselves it won't destroy their balance. They wait until they feel strong enough, safe enough, and steady enough to express something without fearing that it will be used against them. Love is a private experience long before it becomes a shared one. So when you finally see the signs, the softness, the subtle warmth, the small opening, understand this. The avoidant didn't just start caring. They're simply showing you the love they've been holding in silence for far longer than you realized. When an avoidant starts caring, something shifts inside them. Not excitement, not confidence, but a sudden, overwhelming awareness of every flaw they've spent years trying to hide. It's like love turns on a bright light in a room. They prefer keeping dim. Suddenly, the parts of themselves they've managed to keep tucked away feel exposed, sharp, and impossible to ignore. Where others feel romance, they feel pressure. Where others feel connection, they feel vulnerability crawling up their spine. The moment an avoidant starts developing real feelings, their inner dialogue becomes louder, harsher, and far more critical. What if I disappoint them? This thought becomes the constant echo in their mind. They worry that loving someone automatically creates expectations they won't know how to meet. They fear emotional demands, fear not responding right, fear being compared to someone more emotionally available. It's not that they doubt your intentions, they doubt their ability to be what you deserve. Then comes the second fear, What if I need too much? Avoidants grew up believing their needs were either too heavy, too inconvenient, or too unsafe to express. So when they care, they worry that their desire for closeness, even if it's subtle, will expose them. They're terrified of depending on someone because dependency has always felt like a trap, not a shelter. The idea of wanting you, of missing you, of needing something from you feels like stepping into emotional quicksand. But the fear that cuts the deepest is this one: what if they get close and see I'm not enough? Avoidants carry a quiet, persistent belief that something inside them is fundamentally flawed, not broken, just too much or too little, too distant, too intense, too private, too closed off, too hard to understand, too slow to open. They think that if you get too close, you'll eventually see what they've been hiding all along, the vulnerable parts they've never allowed anyone to sit with. This is why their distance isn't rejection, it's self-protection. When they step back, it's not because they want to leave you behind. It's because they want to protect you from the version of themselves they don't fully accept, and protect themselves from the possibility that you might walk away once you see who they really are. Distance gives them time to regulate the emotional panic that rises with closeness. It gives them space to breathe, to analyze, to regain a sense of control they lose the moment they start caring too deeply. People often misinterpret this withdrawal as a lack of love, but the truth is the opposite. Avoidants don't become hyper aware of their flaws with people who mean nothing to them. They become hyper aware when their emotions are real. The closer they feel, the more self-critical they become. And their instinct to pull back is simply a shield, a way of managing feelings that feel massive, overwhelming, and dangerously vulnerable. Their space isn't a sign that they don't care. It's proof that they care so much. It scares them. One of the most misunderstood truths about avoidance is this: they don't pull back because they feel nothing. They pull back because they feel too much. When they're indifferent, they're calm, open, even surprisingly easy to be around. But the moment real attachment forms, everything inside them tightens. The closer they feel, the faster they retreat. Not out of disinterest, not out of coldness, but because closeness activates every survival instinct they've spent years perfecting. To an avoidant, emotional closeness doesn't feel like connection. It feels like losing control. Love, warmth, intimacy. These things are beautiful for most people, but for an avoidant, they signal danger. And danger triggers their oldest coping habits. The first one is their independence armor, the instinctive need to protect their autonomy at all costs. When they care about someone, especially someone who feels emotionally significant, they start to fear that they're trading their freedom for vulnerability. They worry that closeness will pull them into expectations, obligations, or emotional dependency they aren't equipped to sustain. So they create space, not to push you away, but to hold on to the identity they fought hard to build. Then comes the emotional shutdown. When the bond deepens, avoidants often feel emotions rising faster than they can process. They don't know how to talk about them, express them, or ask for reassurance. So instead, they freeze, they retreat inward, they detach just enough to reduce the emotional intensity to something manageable. This shutdown isn't anger, rejection, or punishment. It's their nervous system trying to keep them from feeling overwhelmed. It's their way of staying in control of something that suddenly feels too powerful. But the strongest trigger is the "I'm losing myself" panic. Avoidants fear merging too deeply. They fear becoming so connected that they can no longer find the line between their needs and someone else's. Love threatens the emotional boundaries they rely on to feel safe. So when they get attached, they start to panic internally. Am I becoming too dependent? Am I giving too much? Am I losing my space, my clarity, my stability? This panic isn't logical. It's instinctive. It comes from their earliest experiences, moments where closeness felt smothering, overwhelming, or impossible to navigate. So when they distance themselves, it's not a sign that the relationship is dying. It's a sign that the relationship has reached a depth that scares them. Distance is their way of catching their breath. Stepping back helps them regulate the intensity of what they're feeling. It allows them to come back to the relationship without the emotional fog of panic or overwhelm. It gives them time to ground themselves before re-engaging. Most people interpret this distance as abandonment, but in the avoidance emotional world, distance is actually the opposite. It's preservation, not of the relationship, of themselves. They need space, not to escape, but to stabilize. And if they return after taking that breath, understand what that means. They didn't retreat because they didn't care. They retreated because they cared enough to stay without losing themselves in the process. Other attachment styles express love by moving closer, more attention, more affection, more constant connection. But avoidants operate on a completely different emotional wavelength. For them, love isn't proven through closeness, it's proven through space. When an avoidant cares, they don't cling, crowd, or demand. Instead, they step back just enough to make sure you don't feel pressured, smothered, or consumed. Where others show love by increasing intensity, avoidants show love by protecting your autonomy, the same autonomy they fight so hard to protect for themselves. In avoidance, space is not distance. Space is respect. It's their way of saying, I care about you enough not to overwhelm you. Because deep down, avoidants know what it feels like to be emotionally flooded. They know how suffocating it feels when someone pushes for more closeness than they're ready for. And the last thing they ever want to do is put that same pressure on you. So their love is quiet, measured, intentional. It's never about consuming your life. It's about coexisting with it. Their version of affection often looks different from what most people are used to. It looks like giving you room to breathe, think, feel, and live independently, even while you're connected. When an avoidant loves you, they won't demand constant updates, reassurance, or attention. They trust you to have your own world beyond the relationship. And that trust is one of the strongest signs of their emotional investment. It means they believe you won't disappear just because they're not gripping tightly. Avoidants also show love by not demanding availability. They won't guilt you for being busy. They won't pressure you to respond instantly. They won't take your silence as rejection. Instead, they assume you're simply living your life because that's how they love too. They value independence, so they naturally offer it. And even though it may look detached from the outside, it's actually the most stable, secure version of affection they know how to give. And then there's their most misunderstood expression of love, moving slowly on purpose. Avoidants don't rush in. They don't fall headfirst. They don't make emotional promises they can't keep. When they care, they pace themselves, not because they're unsure about you, but because they're trying to build something they won't have to run from later. Slowness for an avoidant is not hesitation. Slowness is sincerity. It's their way of telling you, I want this to last, so I need to move at a speed where I don't lose myself. This is why many people misread avoidance. They assume that space equals disinterest, that independence equals emotional distance, that slow movement equals doubt. But if you look closely, you'll see the truth. Avoidants don't give space to escape the relationship. They give space so the relationship can breathe. They don't move slowly because they don't care. They move slowly because they care in a way that demands stability over speed. Their love isn't loud. Their love isn't clingy. Their love isn't urgent. Their love is room to be yourself. And in the avoidant world, that is the highest form of affection. Avoidance won't announce self-improvement. They won't sit you down and tell you they're working on themselves. They won't make dramatic promises, and they won't talk about how much they're changing. Brides feel too exposed, too risky, too vulnerable. But when an avoidant loves, something subtle but powerful begins to shift inside them. Not loudly, not publicly, but quietly. Love doesn't make them talk more, it makes them try more. Not in big gestures, but in the tiny, steady adjustments that only someone paying attention will ever notice. One of the first signs is fewer disappearing acts. The avoidant who once needed long stretches of solitude suddenly shortens the distance. They still need space that never changes, but they take it with more awareness and more care. They don't vanish without explanation. They don't leave you guessing. Instead, they become more conscious of how their absence affects you. It's not that love erases their instinct to retreat. It just teaches them to return sooner with more intention and with more clarity. That alone for an avoidant is an enormous step toward closeness. Next comes more intentional communication. Avoidants aren't naturally expressive, and emotional conversations can feel overwhelming to them. But when they love, they make small, deliberate efforts to meet you where you are. They check in more often. They reply a little faster. They share thoughts they would normally keep inside. They try to explain themselves, not perfectly, not fluently, but honestly. You might notice them pausing before they speak, choosing words with care, trying not to push you away with their default distance. It's not dramatic, but it's genuine. For them, communication becomes an act of love, not a requirement. Then there are the small but meaningful efforts, the kind that never come with a spotlight. They remember what matters to you. They pay attention to your triggers, your stress, your comfort. They show up in practical ways, fixing something you mentioned once, supporting a dream you barely talked about, adjusting their plans because they know it makes your life easier. Avoidants don't show love through big romantic gestures. They show it through subtle acts that say, I'm paying attention, even when it looks like I'm not. These efforts might seem minor to the outside world, but for an avoidant, each one is a step outside their comfort zone. And the most profound part, they evolve silently for the person who feels safe. Avoidants don't transform because they're pressured, pushed, or criticized. They transform because someone makes vulnerability feel just safe enough to attempt. They grow when the relationship doesn't demand their emotional surrender all at once. They grow when they're allowed to move slowly, steadily, and authentically. Love doesn't force them to become someone else. It inspires them to become a more open, more present version of themselves. So if you ever find yourself noticing these shifts, the quiet consistency, the softened edges, the small attempts that weren't there before, understand what you're seeing. Avoidants don't change for love in theory. They change for the person who finally made love feel safe enough to try. Avoidants don't respond to chasing, they shut down. The more someone pushes, demands, questions, or tries to pull them closer, the faster the avoidance walls rise. Pressure makes them feel cornered. Expectations make them feel trapped. And emotional urgency feels like a threat to their autonomy. What many people interpret as disinterest is actually emotional overwhelm. Avoidants don't pull back because they don't care. They pull back because they feel chased, and nothing makes them retreat faster than the sense that someone is trying to claim their time, their attention, or their emotional availability before they're ready. But the opposite is also true. Avoidants open up for consistency, the steady, grounded energy that makes them feel safe enough to stay. They fall for the person who doesn't demand closeness, but quietly allows it. The person who shows up without pushing. The person whose presence doesn't feel like pressure, but like calm. Avoidants are hypersensitive to emotional intensity, but deeply drawn to emotional stability. That's why calm energy is magnetic to them. It tells their nervous system, you're not being rushed. You're not being cornered. You get to move at your own pace. Avoidants also crave a stable presence, someone who doesn't disappear at the first sign of distance, someone who doesn't spiral when the avoidant needs space. To them, stability is proof of emotional maturity. It shows that the relationship won't collapse if they pull away to regulate themselves. When they see you remain steady instead of dramatic, grounded instead of reactive, patient instead of panicked, that's when they start trusting you. It's not the grand gestures or intense emotions that win them over. It's the quiet stability that says, I'm here and I'm not trying to control you. And then there is emotional patience, the quality avoidants crave without ever knowing how to ask for it. They need someone who understands that their fears don't disappear just because they care. Someone who allows them to open slowly without demanding immediate vulnerability. Someone who doesn't interpret their silence, their pauses, or their need for distance as rejection. Emotional patience is not waiting in silence, it's understanding without pressure. It's responding with softness instead of fear. It's giving the avoidant room to come forward in their own time, which is the only time closeness can last for them. This is why love grows for avoidance when they no longer feel hunted, when they no longer feel like they're being pursued, cornered, or emotionally demanded, when their heart isn't being pulled faster than they can process, when someone gives them the freedom to expand and retreat without turning those moments into conflict. In that emotional climate, calm, steady, patient, the avoidant relaxes, their shoulders drop, their guard lowers, they stop fearing that love will cost them their identity. And in that safety, something rare happens. They begin to move toward you on their own, not because they're pushed, but because they finally feel free enough to choose closeness. For an avoidant, love isn't a soft landing, it's a confrontation with their deepest fears. Their mind is wired for survival, not vulnerability. So when real attachment forms, something strange happens inside them. Their brain says, leave before you're left. but their heart whispers, but this feels different. And that internal conflict becomes the quiet battleground they walk through every day. Avoidants don't run because they don't care. They run because caring finally exposes them. When someone starts meaning something to them, their old instincts activate. The urge to pull away, the impulse to put walls up, the reflex to protect themselves by creating distance. To them, closeness feels like danger, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because closeness means they now have something to lose. So when an avoidant stays even a little, even hesitantly, even imperfectly, you're witnessing something powerful. You're seeing them override their entire life's defense system. Their staying doesn't look dramatic. There is no grand confession, no sweeping romantic moment, no cinematic embrace. Instead, it shows up in their subtle bravery. They reply even when they feel overwhelmed. They show up even when their mind screams retreat. They soften even when their fear tells them they shouldn't. The avoidants stay in slow steps, not leaps. But every slow step is enormous for them. Because love for them is not a feeling, it's a risk. It's the decision to remain where they've historically bolted. And real love, the kind that feels safe, steady, and non demanding, does something remarkable. It interrupts their patterns. They begin to realize running won't protect me anymore. This person doesn't suffocate me. This connection doesn't threaten my freedom. Maybe I can stay. That's when their guarded heart starts to shift. Not quickly, not loudly, but unmistakably. You'll notice it in their quiet effort, the way they open up by centimeters, the way they try harder not to disappear, the way they let you into parts of their world they usually keep locked away. Their staying is never effortless. It's intentional, a deliberate act, a silent fight, a brave choice. Because every moment they remain close is a moment they're rewriting their own history. And that's what makes their love so unique. It's not impulsive. It's not performative. It's not reckless. It's courageous. When an avoidant stays, it's because something in you feels safe. Something in you feels familiar, but not threatening. Something in you feels like home, not a trap. Real love doesn't make them run. Real love makes them face the one thing they've always feared most, being truly seen and not escaping.